Increasing numbers of the vaccinated are dying of COVID in Milwaukee County. January 13, 2022, 50% of COVID deaths were vaccinated individuals, 4 of 8. January 18, 2022, 60% of COVID deaths were vaccinated individuals, 6 of 10. January 30, 2022, 67% of COVID deaths were vaccinated individuals, 2 of 3. February 8, 2022, 100% of COVID deaths were vaccinated individuals, 2 of 2. Total rate for 2022 so far, 27% of COVID deaths were vaccinated individuals, 65 of 244. McIver News Service, February 9, 2022. By Bill Osmulski. The CDC claims the unvaccinated are 97 times more likely to die from COVID than the vaccinated, but recent COVID data from Milwaukee suggests that ratio might be shifting. The most recent data backing the CDC's claim comes from mid-December of last year. The McIver Institute examined Milwaukee County's death records for January and February of this year. Milwaukee County is the only county in Wisconsin that posts detailed records for every death recorded by the medical examiner. The records contain the COVID vaccination status for each individual, including whether they received the booster. The state, unfortunately, does not provide this level of detail in its vaccine breakthrough data. Throughout January and February of 2022, increasing numbers of vaccinated individuals have been dying of COVID. On some days, there have been more deaths among the vaccinated than the unvaccinated. On Tuesday, February 9, 2022, there were 2 COVID deaths recorded in Milwaukee County, and both individuals were vaccinated against COVID. No one died of COVID that day who was not vaccinated. The McIver Institute first spotted this developing trend in January. There were deaths among the vaccinated in 2021, but the percentage slowly began to increase in the first few weeks of 2022. The county hit a grim milestone on January 13, 2022, when half of the people who died of COVID that day were vaccinated, 4 out of the 8, or 50%. A few days later, came the first day when more vaccinated than unvaccinated individuals died of COVID in Milwaukee County. On January 18, 2022, 6 out of the 10 COVID deaths were among the vaccinated, for a rate of 60%. On January 30, 2022, there were 3 COVID deaths in the county, and 2 of the individuals were not only vaccinated, but also boosted. That comes out to 67%. Finally, on February 8, 2022, there were 2 COVID deaths in Milwaukee County and both of them were vaccinated. That comes out to 100%. The sample sizes might be small, but these numbers raise the question, is this the start of a new trend? Throughout the month of January, 474 people in Milwaukee County died of natural causes, and 207 of them were COVID deaths. Of the 207 COVID deaths, 49, or 24%, were vaccinated. So far, in February 2022, 43% of COVID deaths in Milwaukee County have been among the vaccinated. As of February 8, 2022, there have been 37 COVID deaths and 16 of them were vaccinated. 2 were vaccinated and boosted. Not only does this data call into question the CDC's claim that the unvaccinated are 97 times more likely to die of COVID than the vaccinated. It also calls into question data from the Wisconsin Department of Health Services, DHS, which shows that COVID deaths among the unvaccinated are 14 times higher than the vaccinated. That data shows 3.6 people for every 100,000 vaccinated individuals. That data shows 3.6 people for every 100,000 vaccinated individuals die of COVID. Meanwhile, 50.8 people die out of every 100,000 unvaccinated individuals. Only 2 people under the age of 30 died of natural causes in Milwaukee County this year. A 19-year-old woman died of pneumonia and Crohn's disease on January 1st. A 28-year-old female died of hypertensive and atherosclerotic cardiovascular disease, lupus, and diabetes on January 6th. Only 10 people died exclusively of COVID and had no comorbidities, 4%. From January 1st to February 8, 2022, there were 244 COVID deaths in Milwaukee County, and 65 of those individuals were vaccinated, 27%. Lecture 2. Civilizations of the World, Mesopotamia, Indus, Egypt, Carol, Europe, Africa, Islamic Empires. Introduction. The first lecture provided the definitions needed for the study of science and civilization. This lecture continues to lay the basis for the study by providing a very brief overview of the civilization. The emergence of the first civilizations coincided with the development of the first cities, which occurred some time before 3000 BC. It is instructive to briefly summarize what the human species. It is well established from genetic studies of today's world population and archaeology that the first humans came from Africa between 8 and 6 million years ago. They lived in tropical and sub-expand their living range into colder climates. Another 1.5 million years passed before major new development. The first remnants of permanent dwellings are recorded from about 50,000 BC. Domestication of animals followed around 30. Replace animal skin at the same time, and the making of sails for simple boats was well known before civilization began. Compared with the early years of the human species, this period, when we consider the development of civilization, which evolved from the first cities to today's megacities in the time span of 5,000 years. The first civilizations. Humans took the step from the New Stone Age to civilization in two independent developments and at about the same time. Shortly before 3000 BC, the people of the Indus Valley in today's Pak and Goats began with the construction of cities. At the same time, the Sumerians, who had moved from Anatolia into Mesopotamia, the region between the Euphrates and Tigris rivers in today, a local people engaged in agriculture, weaving, metalwork, pottery and other industries, began to build cities as well. Both civilizations took the giant step of developing a script, which the Indus Valley, known as Dravidian, had some 250 to 500 characters, which have not all been deciphered to date. In Mesopotamia there is evidence that writing developed independently in Sumer. Sumerian cuneiform writing. There are many parallels between the two civilizations. Both had an advanced division of labor based on a high level of agricultural productivity in a fertile river valley. Both used wheat documents, both invented the wheel. Archaeological estimates of the size of their cities, which were surrounded by a wall, range from 23,000 to 41,250 for the Indus civilization and similar faux warehouses for the storage of food supplies granaries. There were of course differences. The Indus civilization developed its own specific Indian traits. Its bullock carts with framed canopy and its river boats are designs that changed little over time. Domestic bathrooms and water drains with the use of burnt and glazed bricks, and its construction of large public basins, built with 2 layers of bricks with gypsum mortar and sealed by a lay. Mesopotamia, on the other hand, successfully developed seaworthy vessels, which allowed its people to develop far-reaching trade contacts. A large brick basin of 219 by 37 meters with a depth civilization, had a small sluice at one end. It has been proposed that this was a dock for ships that plied the seas between India and Mesopotamia. The presence of Mesopotamian seals in Indian two earliest civilizations. Evidence for trading contact along the land route came to light in 1976, when the Soviet archaeologist Saryandy found the remains of a civilization in the Karakum region of Turkmenistan years. After the collapse of the Soviet Union, Saryandy's discovery became known to Western Europe, and several archaeological teams now work to uncover large cities in the desert sands. Document this as yet unnamed civilization, commonly referred to as the Bactria Margiana archaeological complex or the Oasis civilization, as a trading place between East and West. Extensive I-region. Other early civilizations. It has often been said that lush and fertile river valleys provide particularly good conditions for the development of civilization. They make agriculture a relatively easy task, provided that they be the major reason for the development of an administration that covers an entire valley. The rise of the Egyptian civilization supports this analysis. It developed only a few centuries later than the civilization in Mesopotamia. Means, the first king of Egypt's recorded history, reigned developed its hieroglyphs script. Menes founded Egypt's capital Memphis, the site of the Great Sphinx and the Giza Pyramids, some 25 kilometers south of today's Cairo. He introduced an efficient administration and initiated the key provide today one of the longest environmental data records of the world. In the context of this course, it is worth reflecting on the significance of the script. The invention of writing was clearly an administrative necessity. The ordinary people would not know what to the annual allocation from the state's grain reserves. Less than 1% of the population were literate in the early civilizations, so the script was a tool for the ruling class, taught only to Thos. The priests were the second literate group, and teaching reading and writing, and, as we shall see in the next lecture, arithmetic took usually place in the temple compound. The script was than in administrative matters. Keeping administrative records is the same from day to day, from year to year. Writing down the results of scientific study has an accumulating effect. It allows development of a civilization. Without a script, science has to rely on oral instruction and memory. The navigational skills of South Pacific Islanders, who can cross entire oceans navigating by the stars, the flight of birds, and for centuries without a script. But it can only survive as long as an individual lives that can instruct the next generation. Without a script, scientific knowledge is lost when the continuity of tradit. The need to be able to read and write excluded the great majority of people from scientific activity. Science was essentially a prerogative of the ruling class, and the vast potential of talent avail was very much slower than it could have been. This situation only changed with the introduction of general education systems in the early 20th century. The monopolization of science by the ruling class increased the separation between science and technology. Technological inventions were the area of the urban tradesmen, who handed their SK were they normally interested in the daily activities of the lower classes. The first European civilization developed on Crete, an island of today's Greece in the eastern Mediterranean. Known as the Minoan civilization, it originated shortly after the beginning of civil than 15 kilometers. It is not surprising therefore that the people of Crete were excellent seafarers. Seaworthy ships with many oars and a single mast and a sail were known in Crete before 4000 BC. Contact with both the Mesopotamian and the Egyptian civilizations and learned the technology for metal smelting. The Minoan civilization is an early example of a civilization that developed through learning from others. But it had its own core achievements, particularly its own script. Many researchers evolved. The Minoan language itself suggests that the Minoans migrated from Anatolia, which would indicate a connection to even older traditions than Egypt and Mesopotamia. A continuous line leads from the Minoans to Greece, Rome, modern Europe and the USA. There will thus be more opportunities during the course to reflect on the Minoan civilization. It is remarkable that the step from the Neolithic age to civilization occurred in Eastern Asia, the Middle East and Northern Africa at about the same time in independent developments. It suggests logical step. The fact that no similar development was known from America was an invitation for some to propose racial inferiority of the American indigenous people in comparison to others. The relationship between science and racism will arise again later in the discussion of number systems. In the present context, it is sufficient to state that the first American civilization developed. This fact has only come to light in the last decade of the last century with the discovery of Caral, which was officially announced in 2001. Though located on a permanent river, it is situated in Peru, one of the most fertile coastal upwelling regions of the world. The inhabitants of Caral processed the cotton grown on irrigated fields in the narrow river valley into fishing nets and trad. As our timeline shows, By the middle of the 3rd millennium BC, major civilizations existed in Asia, Africa, Europe and America. After about 2500 BC, new civilizations did not have to evolve out of families. The Japanese civilization developed from Chinese influence, the Persian civilization from Assyrian influence, Rome from Greek influence. The only occasion where a new civilization took on an independent character of its own was the founding of Islam in the 7th century AD. Originally a religious movement of the Arab world, Itsu. Europe as far as Spain and Vienna, south into sub-Saharan Africa and east into the Indian subcontinent. In all these regions the new Muslim rulers found highly developed civilizations. The Islam something new. Muslim readiness to adopt ideas and achievements has given the Islamic civilization its own characteristics. It kept, preserved and greatly refined what others had developed. Its importance when Europe had sunk into the Dark Ages and could no longer make sense of its own achievements from the times of ancient Greece and Rome, the European scientific tradition was kept alive. Our timeline places the beginning of civilization in Black Africa at around 1300 AD. Whether this is correct or just an indication of our ignorance is impossible to establish. Africa has suffered that great empires existed before and at the time of arrival of the first Europeans is beyond doubt. Ruins of stone houses, walls and fortifications found across today's Zimbabwe and Mozambique, the Indian Ocean coast. Chinese porcelain found in their buildings testifies for their extensive trading contacts. The Muslim kingdom of Mali flourished in West Africa from the 13th to the 16th century. Its wealth and advanced state of development can be judged from the pilgrimage to Mecca undertaken by 60,000 men including 12,000 slaves. The infrastructure required to feed such a convoy during a long desert voyage is in itself an achievement of an advanced civilization. Everyone including the walked in front, each carrying a staff with gold decorations. 80 camels at the end of the caravan each carried 300 pounds of gold. Musa's generosity with gold as presents caused the collapse of Musa's voyage effectively put Africa on the world map. The Arab historians of the time could not praise Africa's wealth and culture high enough. Mali's first university was established under Musa. Unfortunately, little is known about the scientific achievements of Africa even from its Islamic times, so systematic has been the destruction when the colonial powers arrived. The kingdom of and looted by the British colonial army in 1897. The loot, thousands of bronze plaques, is now on display in the British Museum in London. The government of Nigeria and the United Nations Edu. Summary. The first civilizations developed independently around 3000 BC in the Indus Valley and in Mesopotamia, followed around 2800 BC by the civilization of Egypt. The three civilizations developed trade contacts at an early stage and learned from each other. The first American civilization developed before 2700 BC at Caral. The Minoan civilization, the ancestor of the European civilization, developed from a trading society and adopted foreign inventions. The Islamic civilization, the last new civilization in human history, began around 700 AD. Very little is known about African civilizations before about 500 AD. Next, how did humans ever survive without vaccines? Why does man How did humans ever survive without vaccines? Why does man find himself to be smart enough to play God? Why is DHS and pro-vaxxers concerned about mortality due to COVID-19 but it is acceptable to allow corporations and pharmaceuticals to monopolize, data rape, exploit, sell profit, manipulate, weaponize, triangulate, gaslight, skew, twist, orchestrate, utilize statisticulation and poison our A nervous system, B air, C water, D food, E mental health, F social networks, G economic sustainability, H job security, I freedom, J free speech, K dignity, L safety, M free will, N food security. Oh heck, let me just paste this here instead. Article 1 Right to equality, Article 2 Freedom from discrimination, Article 3 Right to life, liberty, personal security, Article 4 Freedom from slavery, Article 5 Freedom from torture and degrading treatment, Article 6 Right to recognition as a person before the law, Article 7 Right to equality before the law, Article 8 Right to remedy by competent tribunal, Article 9 Freedom from arbitrary arrest and exile, Article 10 Right to fair public hearing, Article 11 Right to be considered innocent until proven guilty, Article 12 Freedom from interference with privacy, family, home and correspondence, Article 13 Right to free movement in and out of the country, Article 14 Right to asylum in other countries from persecution, Article 15 Right to a nationality and the freedom to change it, Article 16 Right to marriage and family, Article 17 Right to own property, Article 18 Freedom of belief and religion, Article 19 Freedom of opinion and information, Article 20 Right of peaceful assembly and association, Article 21 Right to participate in government and in free elections, Article 22 Right to social security, Article 23 Right to desirable work and to join trade unions, Article 24 Right to rest and leisure, Article 25 Right to adequate living standard, Article 26 Right to education, Article 27 Right to participate in the cultural life of community, Article 28 Right to a social order that articulates this document, Article 29 Community duties essential to free and full development, Article 30 Freedom from state or personal interference in the above rights.
This is the next in my series of videos explaining historical materialism and modes of production. And in this one I'm talking about slave economy. Now, in my previous videos I explained how the latter stages of clan society led to the beginnings of patriarchy and the beginnings of capture of people. And slavery arises in clan societies through war. Captives can either be killed or they can be ransomed or put to work. But in clan societies without developed commodity production, the potential scale of the institution of slavery is limited by the consumption needs of the household holding the slave. For slavery to be used on a large scale, for it to become the dominating and determining element in the economic system, the crops the slaves produce have got to be sold, and that in turn means there must be a market of consumers, and typically that means an urban population. There must be a means of transport to move the product from the farms to distant consumers, and there must develop a market in slaves themselves. So you have certain critical thresholds. The establishment of a slave economy depends on a certain density of population, because without that there are no towns. And it depends on a certain level of technology, and particularly the technology of transport. Because without that, without technologies of transport, you get no developed commodity markets. So I'm going to be focusing in this video on the technical conditions that are required for slavery. Technology constrains the social relations that people can enter into. If we use Marxist terminology, the forces of production determine the possible relations of production. And the key point about a slave economy is that it's a muscle power economy. A slave economy is mainly driven by human and animal muscles, with the main exception being sailing transport. Now, my friend Greg Michelson sent me this interesting photo of a slave-operated pump in a mine in Spain. It's an elaborate mining industry in the period of slave production, but it all worked by unaided human labour, and the big problem in any mine is drainage. And we know that in the early stages of capitalist industrialisation, designing pumps to get water out of mines provided the impetus for the development of the steam engine. But in the slave days, the slave just walked on a treadmill, and a chain of buckets on the circumference of the wheel then raised the water. Now, how much energy can you get from a human being? According to Rousseau, a man of average size working on a lever such as an oar, whether it's a lever of an oar or a capstan or turning a mill, a hand-operated mill, can apply a force around 80 newtons in steady work. And if you multiply that by the speed at which they can typically move the lever, whether it's an oar, a capstan, a crank on a wheel, the sustained output that people can produce is between 60 and 100 watts. At a sprinting level, you can briefly produce more. But if you're thinking about how much energy output a person can produce over the course of a full day, it's 60 to 80 watts, which doesn't sound very much. And this just isn't viable for long-distance cargo carrying. You can row across a river carrying loads. You can row to a nearby island carrying some cargo. But you can't sail from one end of the Mediterranean, or you can't row from one end of the Mediterranean to another and have room in the boat for substantial cargo, in addition to all the rowers who are needed to power it, and in addition to the food that the rowers are going to eat in moving that transport. Now, since you're relying on muscle power, and we're talking about a system producing commodities, and we're talking about moving crops to market, the other method they had available were ox carts. Now, an ox is surprisingly strong. It can apply 600 to 800 newtons force, substantially more than a horse can. And its sustained power output is around half a kilowatt. That's actually less than one notional horsepower. A notional horsepower is about 740 kilowatts. Horses can't actually sustain a horsepower for very long. But to do that, it's only viable if you've got good roads. And slave civilizations did build good roads. But the cost is still very high. It only makes bulk transport of crops viable up to about 50 kilometres. We know that the cost of transporting grain 30 kilometres from the port of Ostia to the city of Rome per ton of grain, or modius of grain, what have you, was the same as it cost to sail the full 3,000 kilometres from Egypt to Ostia. So muscle-powered land transport is very expensive. The thing which made the slave economy of the ancient world viable was the square-rig sailing ship. Unaided human labour can't transport large loads economically for long distances. For that you need a non-human source of power. And classical slavery depended on two means of transport: the Mediterranean square-rig sailing ship and the ox cart. And the Mediterranean seafloor is littered with shipwrecks of these types of ships, covering a period of maybe 2,000 years that they were in use of the slave economy. And the classical slave economy is a shoreline economy, a coastal economy. The Roman Empire didn't penetrate far into continental land masses. Insofar as it did, it was in Gaul, but there's a set of big rivers which can be used for transport. It was unable to penetrate into the mass of what's now Eastern Europe and Russia, unable to penetrate far into Africa. Everything depended on the economy of shipping things around. And actually a key phase in that, which is only realised recently, was that there was a transition between the square-rigged sailing vessel, which had been known to the Egyptians, and what's known as the lateen rig, which is a triangular sail. And a triangular sail can be used to sail to windward. That is to say, you don't just have to sail with the wind behind you. You can beat against a prevailing wind. And by using reefs, that is to say, pieces of rope attached to the sail, it's possible to take one of these square sails and pull up one corner of it and produce one of these triangular sails. So it's now reckoned that the Roman and Greek single mast or two mast sailing ships probably could be configured as a lateen rig and sail against the wind. If you look at the next big slave economy, historically the Indian Ocean slave economy, that definitely depended on lateen rig dhows. Again, it depended on seaborne transport networks, windborne transport networks, with slight differences in that the sailing depended on the seasonal variation of the monsoon winds, which allowed sailing in one direction in one season and the other direction in another. Now, I said sailing to windward. You can also sail with the wind to your side. And even a square rig ship, if its sails are oriented at 45 degrees, which you can do by adjusting the stays, can generate a net force forward. Now, this is a diagram by Benjamin Franklin explaining how the sailing ships of his day, like this, operated. And these were the basis of the Atlantic slave economy. They used mainly square sail sailing ships because they're able to take advantage of the trade winds. And this set up a possible trading pattern such that they could sail on a beam reach to Africa, pick up slaves, sail before the wind to the West Indies or the United States, or what's now the United States, and then sail before the wind back to Europe. And that triangular pattern was the basis of the oceanic slave economies of the 17th and 18th century. So what I'm saying is that slave economies are deeply connected to modes of transport. They can only arise where there is an efficient means of transport to transport goods and transport slaves, and to transport them long distances. And that's because slave economy is a commodity producing economy with the objective of selling the product of slave estates on a market. Now, this gives rise to what some authors will call mercantile capital within the slave economy. And you get companies formed trading in slaves in the 17th and 18th century, that's obvious, but you also had things similar to company forms or joint venture forms existing in the other slave economies. And how is it that this mercantile economy, mercantile capital, can exist in the midst of the slave economy? Well, it's basically because at that point in time, the only powered machines of any significance were sailing ships. And a sailing ship is a large, complex machine. It's an element of constant capital. Only those who are relatively wealthy can afford to buy and operate these ships, and they are therefore able to, in the midst of a generally slave economy, have an island of capitalist exploitation, using a system of machinery to exploit the wage-laboured sailors to carry out the transport process. And rather than seeing this as mercantile capital, it would be more accurate to see it as a capitalist transport industry in the midst of a muscle-powered slave economy. The video series is as a backup to a book of mine that's coming out in the autumn of 2019 called How the World Works. Since it's being published by a left-wing publisher and I agreed to waive royalties on it, my only way of getting any money back for the effort put in is through my Patreon account. So if you value it, I would encourage you to give me a small donation for it.
Causes of death as follows: heart disease, high blood pressure, high blood cholesterol, and smoking are key risk factors for heart disease. Several other medical conditions and lifestyle choices can also put people at a higher risk for heart disease, including diabetes, overweight and obesity, cancer. Leading risk factors for preventable cancers are smoking, getting too much UV radiation from the sun, more likely from suntan lotion, but this is my contribution from referencing doctors whom possess empathy and common sense, or tanning beds, being overweight or having obesity, and drinking too much alcohol. Some kinds of cancer, like breast, cervical, and colorectal, can be caught early through screening. Alzheimer's disease is a progressive neurologic disorder that causes the brain to shrink, atrophy, and brain cells to die. Alzheimer's disease is the most common cause of dementia, a continuous decline in thinking, behavioral and social skills that affects a person's ability to function independently. Studies in animals have indicated that air pollution particulates can speed degeneration of the nervous system. And human studies have found that air pollution exposure, particularly from traffic exhaust and burning wood, is associated with greater dementia risk. Drinking large amounts of alcohol has long been known to cause brain changes. Several large studies and reviews found that alcohol use disorders were linked to an increased risk of dementia, particularly early onset dementia. Research has shown that the same risk factors associated with heart disease may also increase the risk of Alzheimer's disease. These include lack of exercise, obesity, smoking or exposure to secondhand smoke, high blood pressure, high cholesterol, poorly controlled type 2 diabetes. These factors can all be modified. Therefore, changing lifestyle habits can to some degree alter your risk. For example, regular exercise and a healthy low-fat diet rich in fruits and vegetables are associated with a decreased risk of developing Alzheimer's disease. Studies have found an association between lifelong involvement in mentally and socially stimulating activities and a reduced risk of Alzheimer's disease. Low education levels, less than a high school education, appear to be a risk factor for Alzheimer's disease. As Alzheimer's disease progresses to its last stages, brain changes begin to affect physical functions, such as swallowing, balance, and bowel and bladder control. These effects can increase vulnerability to additional health problems such as inhaling food or liquid into the lungs, aspiration, flu, pneumonia and other infections, falls, fractures, bedsores, malnutrition or dehydration, constipation or diarrhea, dental problems such as mouth sores or tooth decay. Alzheimer's disease is not a preventable condition. However, a number of lifestyle risk factors for Alzheimer's can be modified. Evidence suggests that changes in diet, exercise and habits, steps to reduce the risk of cardiovascular disease, may also lower your risk of developing Alzheimer's disease and other disorders that cause dementia. Heart-healthy lifestyle choices that may reduce the risk of Alzheimer's include the following: exercising regularly, eating a diet of fresh produce, healthy oils and foods low in saturated fat such as a Mediterranean diet, following treatment guidelines to manage high blood pressure, diabetes and high cholesterol, asking your doctor for help to quit smoking if you smoke. Studies have shown that preserved thinking skills later in life and a reduced risk of Alzheimer's disease are associated with participating in social events, reading, dancing, playing board games, creating art, playing an instrument, and other activities that require mental and social engagement. Cholesterol manufactured in the brain appears to play a key role in the development of Alzheimer's disease, new research indicates. Diabetes. Drug or chemical-induced diabetes, such as with glucocorticoid use, in the treatment of HIV/AIDS or after organ transplantation. In other individuals, it is believed that a viral infection triggers an autoimmune response. This means that, following the viral infection, the surface architecture of the pancreas is altered, resulting in an attack by the body's immune system. Unfortunately, it appears that a history of viral infection is not available in many children. Several viruses have been implicated, but the real culprit remains unknown. Perhaps one of the biggest risk factors for type 2 diabetes is an unhealthy diet. Many individuals today consume fast foods and processed foods regularly. These foods are high in calories, contain saturated fats, and have high meat content, which are all risk factors for weight gain, leading to diabetes. The best recommendation is to eat a plant-based diet that includes fruits, veggies, whole wheat, low-fat dairy, and nuts. A few common hormonal disorders, like hypothyroidism and Cushing's syndrome, can lead to type 2 diabetes. However, once these disorders are treated, diabetes will most likely resolve. Nephritis, also called glomerulonephritis, is a group of diseases that cause inflammation, swelling, of the nephrons. This can reduce your kidney's ability to filter waste from your blood. Most types of nephritis are caused by your body's immune system reacting to an insult of some sort. This might be a medication, poison, infection, or a change in the way your immune system behaves. Your immune system makes antibodies to attack bacteria or poisons. These antibodies can damage your kidneys and nephrons, causing swelling and scarring. Stroke. However, the good news is that strokes can be prevented, and one key element to this is your diet. Here are some food items that have been negatively associated with an increase in stroke risk.
Where we believe that arming our fellow Americans, both physically and philosophically, helps them fulfill our founding fathers' intent with the Second Amendment to serve as a check on state power.
Hi everyone, I'm Dave Trillo and you're listening to the Resistance Library podcast. Today we're going to talk about how Washington's food subsidies have helped make Americans fat and sick. Not me, of course, but maybe you.
Probably you, statistically speaking. I mean, not to, pick on any of our listeners, though there may be, it's one of those things where because of the selective audience, maybe we have more people who are kind of hip to this sort of thing. And I do think that, on the kind of the right, broadly speaking, I think that there's kind of more awareness of food issues than there were even, say, 3, 4, 5 years ago. I should, before we jump into this, say that I kind of straddle the fence on this because we were talking about off mic about my experiences at the organic grocery store where I will frequently see guys open carrying, old timers mostly, because it's open carry is kind of an old timer thing. And I also will eat McDonald's, 3 or 4 times a week. I'm actually taking a fast food fast right now because I am a man who loves McDonald's and Wendy's and Culver's. Neither of those are sponsors of our show, but perhaps they should be.
Yeah, maybe when hell freezes over.
But in any event, one of the things is people will not be surprised at all to hear is that a lot of the reason why disgusting, cancer-causing, fattening food is cheap and healthy food is, relatively speaking, more expensive is because of government intervention in the economy. So the federal government spends $20 billion, that's just the federal government, $20 billion on farm subsidies annually. 39% of that, 39% of all farms receive some kind of subsidy. We're going to get into who gets subsidies later, because I know that people think that for the most part, farm subsidies is this, noble form of welfare that kind of keeps the American family farm afloat, but that's just not the case. The oil industry in America gets $4.6 billion. That's a good comparison. Housing subsidies get $15 billion. And yeah, a big chunk of that is going to big Aggie. That doesn't even take into account ethanol subsidies or export subsidies to the United States farmers. Again, I don't even know if I want to use farmers to describe this, because while there certainly are what most people would call farmers, receiving these subsidies, I don't think that anyone thinks of the local Tyson piggery as being, quote unquote farmers. So we're going to dig a little deeper into that as we go down the line. It's not just about the money, though, because the money that is spent disincentivizes innovation and also effective and diverse land use, which are things. I mean, we're going to get into the corn thing is like maniacal. I don't know that the earth signed on to grow quite as much corn as it does. But that's maybe a kind of, superstition on my part more than anything. So, the federal subsidies for the agricultural sector are nothing new. There's the Morrill Act of 1862, which is land grant universities with a focus on agricultural education. This is one of those things that, I'm not only fine with that, but that sounds like a great way for federal dollars to be spent in, helping farmers and their children to learn how to better grow our food. I think is all fine and dandy. The Smith-Lever Act of 1914, and I also graduated from a land grant university, so there's that. The Smith-Lever Act of 1914 provided for more funding for agricultural education. The first one that's really similar to the subsidies of today is the Federal Farm Loan Act of 1916. That still exists. If you know what the Farm Credit System is, they have $280 billion in assets, and that was grew out of a study that was commissioned by Theodore Roosevelt. And rural Americans were, of course, in 1916, the bulk of the American population. Now, what this act did was it allowed farmers to borrow half of the land value of the land that they owned and 20% of their improvements. Loans were available between $100 and $10,000. And I do not know how to say the word amortized. This is one of those words that I've read and know what it means, but have never heard said aloud.
Yeah, that's it. Same root word as amore.
Oh, no kidding. Really?
Yeah, for some reason.
Making that up?
No, for real. Love has root word of amortized.
Very strange. So they could pay anyway. In layman's terms, they could pay it off between 5 and 40 years. That was basically to give poor farmers an alternate source of credit than large banks, which were often seen as being predatory. Again, this seems all fine and dandy to me, especially given that it came out of a study commissioned by Teddy Roosevelt, who I think is one of the 4 greatest presidents that this country's ever had.
Can't hate anything he's ever done.
Yeah, I mean, my intuition is that that's probably a good thing to have around, and coming out of a study commissioned by TR gives me the additional kind of
He had an unbreakable moral compass. I know we shouldn't take anything on faith, but if he did it, you can take pretty good comfort that he was doing it for the right reasons.
Yeah, sure. I mean, if I'm wrong, hit me up at SamJacobs45 on Twitter and let me know why. But again, where things change is where many things change in America, and that is with the New Deal, which the theory anyway is that it attempted to minimize the impact of the worst parts of the Depression. Keen listeners of the show know that there are parts of the New Deal that I think were great and parts that I think were awful. The Tennessee Valley Authority being probably the number one example of one that I thought was great. So anyway, the Agricultural Marketing Act of 1929 was passed under President Herbert Hoover, who was generally blamed for the Depression and attacked as having done nothing to protect Americans from it. So, here's him doing nothing. The act created the Federal Farm Board, which was mostly just a modification of the Federal Farm Loan Board, which we talked about a couple minutes ago. He being Hoover, believed that he could stop the collapse of agricultural prices, which was a serious economic crisis in the United States at that time, by buying, selling, and storing surplus grains. He also wanted to lend farmers money on generous terms, and the farmers used the loans to purchase seed and feed. That was very, very important in the South because they were just getting over a drought. Now, the problem was that farmers started raising more crops than they could sell, and in many cases, they probably knew that they could not sell quite as much grain as they were growing, grain and other crops. The government was going to buy anything that they produced, and there was no limit on the production. So there's no cap on what the federal government could buy. So predictably, farmers just said, okay, well, grow as much as I can. And, and who can blame them, really? So there was also no counter for deflation, which is deflation is a big deal if you're a farmer. A big chunk of the post Civil War debate in America is arguments between the Democratic and Republican Party about whether or not the government should combat deflation, and if so, how they should do it. And this is because of the agricultural nature of the United States around that time, because deflation is, a huge crisis if you're a farmer.
And why exactly is that, Sam?
Mostly because of the price of crops and the repayment of loans. So farmers, especially in the 19th century, generally carried a lot of debt and or were, constantly in and out of debt. And if the value of the money changes, then both your mortgage effectively changes and the market price of your crop changes. And so deflation screws with the farmer's ability to plan how they're going to pay back mortgages that they might have on their land, and things of this nature. Like, deflation is a pretty big disaster if you're a farmer. It's not real great anyway, but for farmers especially, it's not a good thing.
Processed foods or junk foods, such as crackers, chips, store-bought goods and fried foods, typically contain a lot of trans fat, a very dangerous type of fat because it increases inflammation in the body. It is this increase in the inflammation of the body, a foundation of many diseases, that is linked to increased stroke risk and also many other serious, life-threatening diseases as well.
Technical conditions for the creation of markets, which in turn were necessary for the development of slave economy. I'm now going to focus on the slave economy and value itself by looking at the forms of circulation and monetary forms that were induced by the slave mode of production. Again, I have to emphasize that the slave mode of production was a form of commodity production. In addition to having a well-developed transport system, it had well-developed money, and indeed gold and silver coinage were the specific invention of the slave mode of production, and were invented to support the social relations of the slave mode of production. The first coins, around 700 BC, come from Lydia, which is a Greek city-state in Asia Minor, and they were stata, where the coins were called stata, which is a unit of gold, and gold stata coins continued to be issued by Greek kingdoms after that. Now, there's some dispute about the nature of these stata coins, because it turned out that they're made of a gold-silver alloy, so it undermines the theory that the origins of coins were precise and reliably weighed quantities of gold, because were that the case, the king of Lydia was cheating people by giving them a gold-silver alloy, which at that point no one knew how to determine whether it was an alloy or pure gold. You've all heard the story of Archimedes and his bath. Well, why was he thinking about this when he was in his bath? He was thinking about it because he'd been asked by the king of Syracuse to determine whether his supposedly gold crown actually was gold. And what Archimedes had hit on was a technique by which you could test whether an object or an ingot was pure gold or gold and silver, because you weigh it and you see what volume of water it displaces, then you compare it with something you know that is gold and see what the ratio of weight to water displaced is, and then apply the same principle to a piece of silver, and by detecting the variation in density you can detect whether it's pure silver or pure gold. Now, that wasn't available 700 BC, so it's pretty clear that even from the start states were issuing coins and raising revenue by the fact that the coins were not of monetary value, of metallic value equivalent to their notional face value. Another thing to note is that these are very high denomination coins and wouldn't be usable for small scale commerce. They could be used for paying taxes by landlords, and they could be used perhaps for major purchases, but not for day-to-day trade. For that to happen, you require silver coinage to come into use for smaller scale transactions, and both Athens and Rome issued large quantities of silver coin. Those are for sort of moderate scale transactions. To get an idea of what you can buy with silver coins, go and have a look at the current selling price of silver dollars. Now, for petty commerce though, you actually need copper token money. and copper token money was issued both in the Chinese Empire and in the Roman Empire. Chinese Empire never used or never issued precious metal coinage, only issued token copper coinage. And in Rome, the effect of long-term inflation meant that by the 3rd century, a large part of the denarius in circulation was a copper coin, not a silver coin. Now, the same thing happened in more recent times. The British penny was originally a silver coin and is now not even a copper coin. It's a copper and iron debased coin. So there's a general tendency for states that are issuing coinage to debase it over time. Not only do we see the same tendencies existing with state coinage, we also see things which we tend to think are purely capitalist phenomena, like financial crises. There's a major financial crisis at 33 AD, which is reported in Tacitus and a number of other historians. So here's we extract from Tacitus. Hence followed a scarcity of money, a great shock being given to all credit, the current coin too, in consequence of the conviction of so many persons and the sale of their property being locked up in the imperial treasury or the public exchequer. To meet this, the Senate had directed that every creditor should have 2/3 of his capital secured on estates in Italy. Creditors, however, were suing for payment in full, and it was not respectable for persons when sued to break faith. The destruction of private wealth precipitated the fall of rank and reputation, till at last the emperor interposed his aid by distributing through the banks 100 million sesterces and allowing freedom to borrow without interest for 3 years, provided the borrower gave security to the state in land to double the amount. Now, that's an account of a financial crisis in AD 33, but many of the same features could have been observed in the 2008 financial crisis.
10 stone beasts line the moat bridge, representing the lineage of Henry VIII and his third wife, Jane Seymour. Consisting of real beasts and mythical creatures, we are honoring these heraldic symbols of one of the nation's most powerful dynasties with the Royal Tudor Beasts collection. The Seymour Panther. The Seymour Panther was given to Jane Seymour, Henry VII's third wife, by the king from the treasury of Royal BT Lick High FTHBF High H8DTDTH Beasts. Like his father before him, Henry VIII adopted the panther as a symbol to reinforce his regal lineage. The statue appears on the viewer's left-hand side, dexter, and the coat of arms depict the Duke of Beaufort's arms, whose family Henry VIII's grandmother descended from. Possessing the tail of a lion and the claws of an eagle, the heraldic beast is often portrayed as angry and incensed, with fire coming from its mouth and ears. Discover more. The Lion of England. A brave and ferocious lion has featured on the shield of England for as long as it has existed. The lion represents English courage, strength, dignity and pride, traits that no animals native to the country at the time seemed to possess. The Lion of England assumed royal beast status in the early 12th century during the reign of Richard I, 1189–99, when heraldry was formally established. Used by Henry VIII as his dexter supporter, which means it appears on the viewer's left-hand side, the Lion of England remains an iconic heraldic symbol to this very day, and perhaps in modern times is more representative of Britishness rather than Englishness. One of the first beasts to flank the parapets of the moat bridge of Hampton Court Palace, the crowned lion supports a shield bearing the impaled arms, a combination of two coats of arms, of Henry VIII and Jane Seymour. The Greyhound of Richmond. The royal family has favored dogs as pets for centuries. Adopted as a heraldic symbol by Edward III, the greyhound symbolizes loyalty, honor and celerity. It is said that Henry VIII attached a special importance to the Greyhound of Richmond, since it was a heraldic emblem adopted by both the Lancasters and the Tudors and thus served to emblemize the Tudors' dynastic right to the throne of England. With a striking appearance, which includes a slim build and protruding ribcage forming an elegant shape, the beast on the moat bridge fixes the viewer with an attentive gaze, ears pricked at the ready and alert to honor any given command. The Yale of Beaufort. A Yale is a mythical creature often alluded to in European mythology that is thought to have a goat-like or antelope body, with 4 legs, the tusks of a boar, a lion's tail and large horns that would swivel to counterattack from all quarters. The Yale of Beaufort connects Henry VIII with the House of Beaufort through his grandmother, another attempt by the king to reinforce the legitimacy of the Tudor dynasty. The beast is also linked to the title of Somerset, which Jane Seymour's brother held as Duke. It is thought Henry VIII gave the beast to his queen in honor of her brother. The Tudor dragon. Adopted as a symbol by all Tudor monarchs in honor of their regal Welsh heritage, the Tudor dragon stands as a ferocious heraldic beast. Dragons were prominent signets during the medieval period and were notably used by Owen Tudor, Henry VIII's great-grandfather. Henry VIII therefore claimed the symbol as a link to Cadwaladr, the King of Gwynedd in Wales from around AD 655 to 682. According to contemporary manuscripts, the Tudor dragon had a red head, back and wings and a gold underside. The Seymour unicorn. Before being chosen by Henry VIII to flank the moat bridge of Hampton Court Palace, the unicorn was rarely used as a royal heraldic beast. The Tudor monarch's decision to include it may lie in its symbolism, as the unicorn represents purity and fertility, and the king desperately needed the gods of fertility to bless his third wife with a son who could perpetuate the dynasty. The unicorn is a mythical creature that appears in the Bible and was recognized by the ancient Greeks. It has an interesting biological composition, possessing the body of a horse with more often than not the cloven hooves and beard of a goat, a lion's tail, and a slender, spiral horn on its forehead. The royal dragon. Similar in shape and design to the Tudor dragon, the royal dragon became a prominent heraldic symbol for the House of Tudor after it rose to power after defeating the House of York in 1485 at the Battle of Bosworth. Standing on the right-hand side, sinister, of the moat bridge of Hampton Court Palace, the royal dragon supports a shield, which bears France modern and England quarterly. Its body composition is 4-legged and reptilian in appearance, like a serpent or lizard, with wings like a bat. Its fiery tongue protrudes from its mouth, challenging anyone who walks past to question the legitimacy of the king who commanded its creation. The Queen's Lion. The lion is a familiar sight in heraldry and traditionally symbolizes strength and courage. The Queen's Lion stands tall and proud on the moat bridge of Hampton Court Palace, supporting a shield bearing Jane Seymour's badge. The badge depicts a hawthorn tree standing behind a gateway, fully blossomed and royally crowned, with a golden phoenix on top of the mount. In Greek mythology, the phoenix was a creature said to symbolize rebirth and love, which suggests that Jane added it to her badge to represent the king's love for her and signify a rebirth from his marriage to his previous wife, Anne Boleyn. The Black Bull of Clarence. The Black Bull of Clarence is a mighty, formidable beast and a heraldic symbol affiliated with the rise of the House of York during the 15th century. On its shield, the bull bears the Tudor rose, which was created by Henry VII to symbolize his marriage to Elizabeth of York and the union of the two great houses, the House of York and House of Lancaster. Intent on establishing the might and power of the Tudor dynasty, as well as legitimizing his position on the throne of England, Henry VIII chose the heraldic beast to flank the moat bridge leading into Hampton Court Palace, no doubt as an indication to anyone who entered that he was a true and formidable monarch. The Queen's Panther. Holding a shield bearing the combined coats of arms, also known as impaled arms, Of Henry VIII and Jane Seymour, the Queen's panther flanks the moat bridge of Hampton Court Palace, eyeing any passer-by with the sharp gaze of a cunning predator. The shield it bears represents the union of Henry VIII and his third wife, Jane Seymour. The dexter, or the left side of the shield, splits Henry VIII's arms into four, an amalgamation of those belonging to his ancestors before him, kings and queens, lords and ladies, and thus establishing his rightful position on the English throne. The sinister, or the right side of the shield, shows Jane Seymour's coat of arms, which portrays her descent from 5 different families who bore coats of arms. The royal Tudor beasts. Be inspired. The Seymour Panther. Find out more. Meet the maker. David Lawrence. Find out more. Making of a dynasty. Find out more. 15 fun facts about Henry VIII. Find out more. The Seymour Panther. Copyright Historic Royal Palaces 2021, produced under license from Historic Royal Palaces Enterprises Limited. Press the next button. Any person with intelligence can see exactly what is being done to US, time and time again. Rob US blind. Politics. Viral infections. Layoffs. Divide. Isolation. Conquer. Terrorism. Economic collapse. Fear. Art of war. Less pay. More work. More stress. More data. More bean counting. Employment resembles closer and closer to an incarceration sentence. Bankruptcy. No property. Less friends and family. More narcissists, more satanic sadism, human trafficking, larger monopolies, less privacy, more perversion, more conspiracies, less language, more confusion, less truth. Rinse. Repeat. Just when we get the wind back in our sails, they pull the rug harder, faster, more frequently, as if we were farm animals in line to get slaughtered. Anyone WHO argues otherwise needs to really assess their own cognitive function. And whether you think you're actually thinking or if you're thinking what someone else brainwashed you to or told you to think. Or perhaps you're a boisterous proud lemming ready to jump whenever your master gives you a command signal. OK sign, thumbs up, scissor hand with fingers splayed, rock biceps, eye tongue out, winking face, throwing kisses, upside down face, zany face, partying face, dizzy face, dancer, person in suit, levitating bone, skull and crossbones, ghost, clown face, poop, alien, monster, robot, alien, weary cat, tears of joy, smiling cat with heart eyes, kiss mark, love letter, heart with ribbon, revolving hearts, heart orange, heart yellow, heart green, heart blue, heart purple, heart brown, heart black, heart white, heart full full score collision dizzy sweat droplets running dash whole bomb ZZ banana peach kiwi fruit coconut eggplant potato corn hot pepper cucumber mushroom bread croissant pancakes cheese wedge cut of meat bacon hamburger fries pizza hot dog sandwich taco egg green salad popcorn butter salt canned food rice ball spaghetti sushi fried shrimp fish cake moon cake fortune cookie shortcake cupcake pie chocolate candy lollipop custard honey pot baby bottle hot beverage teacup wine cocktail tropical drink beer cup with straw tumbler glass bubble tea beverage box ice fork and knife with plate cooking knife amphora. Or if you disagree with all of the above, you must have your hand in the pot and are not worth the time in day to argue with. There are so many examples that can be clearly given as to why these individuals are the last individuals to ever be trusted. But I'll leave a little to your imagination. Maybe today is the day you'd like to practice common sense or use your own brain for once and not regurgitate propaganda fed to you by Project Paperclip or MK Ultramonic programming. Infernal Legion to the Church of Satan to hail Satan to is our military. I am not religious to but I sure as hell am not brain dead enough to drink Satan's Kool-Aid. Words to the wise Satan has all you worshippers indoctrinated into a suicidal death cult. You are disposable to Satan. You are Satan's suicide bombers. You are Satan's pawns in the art of war. Don't ever accept Kool-Aid from Satan. It's not Kool-Aid. It's murder, it's satanic sacrifice, it's worshipping your own death and manifesting the extinction of humanity. It's slavery. It's manipulation. It's brain defective logic. Tell me one thing science has cured that it also isn't contributing to the leading suspected cause. When has any person of power and access to money, resources, status, or power ever truly been able to be trusted? Never for long. And only coincidentally momentarily. People don't believe in conspiracies because it's fun. It's everyone's worst nightmare. Most people do find the truth, desperately hope they are wrong. In the most significant way, they hope they are the ones are crazy, wrong, losing their mind. And not the other way around. If this many people are crazy in your eyes, then you should question yourself. How did so many people get this crazy? Why are they crazy? What would you do? What would you truly do? Hypothetically, if everything were true, would you fight to survive? Would you warn others? Or would you put the blindfold on and wait your turn to get slaughtered? Would you be angry? Would you be frantically attempting to avert apocalyptic insanity? Humanity has never been so ignorant. Our survival and ability to have basic human rights and decency depends on each other. Know thy enemy. I guess you are the enemy. And that's way too many things to list that you are guilty of. You have Google at your fingertips. It takes all but 5 minutes to realize how many times history repeats itself and men in power cannot be trusted. Don't be a fool and stop jeopardizing everyone else's safety by sitting with the enemy. You should be fighting with, not against. It's the slaves against the 1% of the 1%. Don't fool yourself if you're not the latter. They will dispose of you too. Grow up. Get a brain. Learn to read. Figure out common sense. Grow a pair instead of jumping off the bridge because it's what the cool kids are doing. Because you're afraid of being judged, attacked, ostracized. It's better than where your life will be headed if you don't get your head on straight. I repeat, know thy enemy. Use logic. Find common sense. Just look at history. Look at history. The lies are popping out of every corner and I can't even look in any direction without seeing children for sale. Truth is way more twisted than fiction. Go review pharmaceuticals profits. Just remember, if you do come to realize evil is real, that also holds the promise of the opposite, but we need each other to make it through this alive. Devil equals lived. Evolve or die. Evil or live. Shared from Wanda Note.
Technical conditions for the creation of markets which in turn were necessary for the development of slave economy. I'm now going to focus on the slave economy and value itself by looking at the forms of circulation and monetary forms that were induced by the slave mode of production. Again, I have to emphasize that the slave mode of production was a form of commodity production. In addition to having a well-developed transport system, it had well-developed money, and indeed gold and silver coinage were the specific invention of the slave mode of production, and were invented to support the social relations of the slave mode of production. The first coins, around 700 BC, come from Lydia, which is a Greek city-state in Asia Minor, and they were stata, where the coins were called stata, which is a unit of gold, and gold stata coins continued to be issued by Greek kingdoms after that. Now, there's some dispute about the nature of these stata coins, because it turned out that they're made of a gold-silver alloy, so it undermines the theory that the origins of coins were precise and reliably weighed quantities of gold, because were that the case, the king of Lydia was cheating people by giving them a gold-silver alloy, which at that point no one knew how to determine whether it was an alloy or pure gold. You've all heard the story of Archimedes and his bath. Well, why was he thinking about this when he was in his bath? He was thinking about it because he'd been asked by the king of Syracuse to determine whether his supposedly gold crown actually was gold. And what Archimedes had hit on was a technique by which you could test whether an object or an ingot was pure gold or gold and silver, because you weigh it and you see what volume of water it displaces, then you compare it with something you know that is gold and see what the ratio of weight to water displaced is, and then apply the same principle to a piece of silver, and by detecting the variation in density you can detect whether it's pure silver or pure gold. Now, that wasn't available 700 BC, so it's pretty clear that even from the start states were issuing coins and raising revenue by the fact that the coins were not of monetary value, of metallic value equivalent to their notional face value. Another thing to note is that these are very high denomination coins and wouldn't be usable for small scale commerce. They could be used for paying taxes by landlords, and they could be used perhaps for major purchases, but not for day-to-day trade. For that to happen, you require silver coinage to come into use for smaller scale transactions, and both Athens and Rome issued large quantities of silver coin. Those are for sort of moderate scale transactions. To get an idea of what you can buy with silver coins, go and have a look at the current selling price of silver dollars. Now, for petty commerce though, you actually need copper token money. And copper token money was issued both in the Chinese Empire and in the Roman Empire. Chinese Empire never used or never issued precious metal coinage, only issued token copper coinage. And in Rome, the effect of long-term inflation meant that by the 3rd century, a large part of the denarius in circulation was a copper coin, not a a silver coin. Now the same thing happened in more recent times. The British penny was originally a silver coin and is now not even a copper coin. It's a copper and iron debased coin. So there's a general tendency for states that are issuing coinage to debase it over time. Not only do we see the same tendencies existing with state coinage, we also see things which we tend to think are purely capitalist phenomena, like financial crises. There's a major financial crisis at 33 AD, which is reported in Tacitus and a number of other historians. So here's a wee extract from Tacitus. Hence followed a scarcity of money, a great shock being given to all credit, the current coin too, in consequence of the conviction of so many persons and the sale of their property, being locked up in the imperial treasury or the public exchequer. To meet this, the Senate had directed that every creditor should have 2/3 of his capital secured on estates in Italy. Creditors, however, were suing for payment in full, and it was not respectable for persons when sued to break faith. The destruction of private wealth precipitated the fall of rank and reputation, till at last the emperor interposed his aid by distributing through the banks 100 million sesterces and allowing freedom to borrow without interest for 3 years, provided the borrower gave security to the state in land to double the amount. Now, that's an account of a financial crisis in AD 33, but many of the same features could have been observed in the 2008 financial crisis.
Gusto en saludarlo, mi nombre es Luis, soy oriundo de La Serena y llevo alrededor de 25 años acá en Salvador. En una ciudad, un campamento. Salvador es un campamento donde se inició hace alrededor de 40 años. Es joven esta ciudad, construida por los gringos. Nosotros yo llegué hace, como decía, 25 años a la ciudad, a una pequeña localidad que está aquí abajo en Llanta. Después posteriormente me vine aquí a vivir a Salvador. Es un poco crudo llegar de una ciudad como la ciudad de La Serena, llegar a un campamento. Un campamento que no tiene más allá de 12.000 habitantes. Desde el año 72 que esta empresa dejó de ser parte de las empresas norteamericanas. Esto es netamente de Codelco, de la Corporación Nacional del Cobre. Bueno, acá tratamos de surgir con mucho esfuerzo. Yo comencé prácticamente tirando bala, como se dice, a pesar de tener un título universitario. Me inicié tirando bala, ahora gracias a Dios estoy un poco mejor, pero las faenas mineras son así, son duras y acá, bueno, Salvador es una ciudad que está muy limitada y bien dividida. Tenemos estratos sociales bastante marcados. Tenemos una parte donde hay muchos contratistas que tienen un sueldo, trabajan con un sueldo mínimo. Posteriormente viene la gente de la empresa, porque hay roles A, roles B, roles C. Y también esto es muy marcado, esta división, porque los roles A son gente que son de la supervisión, y roles E que son mayores todavía, que son gente de la administración. Y ellos también viven en una parte muy definida, tienen su casa, su población muy aparte del resto. También ellos tienen su club nocturno también, donde van ellos nomás. Sin embargo, la gente que está mucho más abajo no puede actuar directamente no puede participar en esas actividades. Oye, hijito, ¿vamos a poner la mesa? Sí, que tráete las cositas, ¿ya? después de la televisión. Vamos. Bueno, Cristóbal es el menor de mis hijos. Está ahora de vacaciones. Al mediodía llega la mamá y en la noche llegan los otros hijos. Así que esto va de menos a más. Seguramente esto se va a revolucionar. La casa se va a revolucionar porque de escándalo.
Sí.
¿Qué te parece? Oye viejo, pero ¿sabes qué? No tenemos pan, po. Sí, voy a comprar pan. Ya, partamos. Vamos a comprar. Acompáñanos a comprar pan. Desde esa esquina hacia allá, generalmente en ese lado vi todo lo que es supervisión rolado. Es decir, las cuadras de los 700. Y un poco más acá ya va bajando el pelaje, como se dice normalmente. Estamos como bajando a los otros roles. Estamos al rol bella. Entonces, muy marcado esta parte. Cuando hablan de los 700, ¿y quién se? Entonces, la gente que está en los 700 está pasando por una clase mejor definida. Así que en estos momentos vamos a dirigirnos a comprar un poco de pan.
No me divierto mucho porque los niños que conozco se han ido a otras casas y se han ido a los 600 y no los podemos reunir, no tenemos tanto contacto que digamos y apenas me sé el número de teléfono y no jugamos tanto, a veces los vemos y después decimos chao. Yo me entretengo viendo pura tele las tardes porque el Javier va a jornada completa y yo no. Yo tengo pura mañana. Con la escuela 14 y la escuela 1, un amigo que yo conozco que es cubano y se fue por los 600, los 400 más o menos, se encontró con unos amigos, pero que ya eran súper pesados. Después llegó, sí, le empezaron a echar empujones, todo eso, y fue a buscar otros amigos. Después se agarraron a combos así, y al otro día cuando fueron a la escuela le mandaron una suspensión. Y después ahí quedó, un día me fui con el cubano hasta Diego Portales. Y después justo se encontró con otros amigos, pero de la escuela 14 y se enojaron así. Y le metieron pelea y como era uno él, le dijeron ya uno por uno y se fueron.
Le quería comentar que, bueno, nosotros estamos viviendo acá la educación. Hay enseñanza básica y enseñanza media. Estamos con dos colegios que son más o menos básicos, importantes. Tenemos la escuela 14, una escuela número 1 y un liceo. También el liceo llega hasta la enseñanza media. Cristóbal decía recién acerca de la discriminación. A lo mejor Cristóbal no entiende mucho de repente cómo se vive en una localidad así donde hay diferencias sociales. Generalmente la gente llega y se va rápidamente. Uno porque los van cambiando de rol, los van cambiando de escala, de rol. Y lo que perdemos generalmente son mis hijos. Mi hijo perdió ya a uno de sus amigos, de sus grandes amigos, porque los cambiaron a otro sector. Entonces, él se siente mal. Cuando ha intentado hacerlo o buscar a su resto de sus amigos, ya no es lo mismo de antes. Mi hijo perdió porque ya no tiene otros amigos. Y le cuesta conseguir el resto de amigos, porque yo creo que es muy importante o muy difícil conseguir amigos. Bueno, esperamos que más adelante la cosa cambie. Bueno, acá haciendo un recorrido por la localidad de Salvador, está muy marcada la diferencia porque esta es una parte residencial que la componen trabajadores de rol E, rol A, gente que tiene mejores sueldos, entonces vive mejor acomodada. Esto es lo que podemos nosotros apreciar de un área de Salvador. La otra cara de esta zona, esta es Portales, una localidad que está alrededor de 6 kilómetros de la ciudad de Salvador. Como ustedes pueden apreciar, la diferencia es más que notoria con el resto de lo que recién acabamos de apreciar.
esta localidad trabaja mucha gente, alrededor de 1000 personas viven en esta localidad. Esta parte son trabajadores que prestan su servicio a Codelco. Ellos son contratistas, la gran mayoría son contratistas y trabajan en servicio a Codelco, pero trabajan con un sueldo mínimo, no pertenecen a Codelco. Seguramente, como les decía, a lo mejor no van a entender lo que estas montañas dicen. Hay una nostalgia. Nosotros que venimos de afuera añoramos de repente estar en otra localidad donde nacimos. Aquí la soledad es inminente. Muchos la hemos palpado desde que llegamos a esta localidad y a veces nos duele mucho, especialmente cuando nuestros hijos se van y quedamos solos. Yo tengo mis 2 hijos que están estudiando afuera y yo sé que el menor que muy pronto también va a emigrar, vamos a quedarnos con la pareja nomás. Creo que seguramente ustedes nos entenderán la soledad que se siente uno cuando llega acá y cuando también se va, porque al llegar muchas veces los lagrimones no se sueltan. Aquí, esto es lo que nos rodea aquí en Salvador.